So my name is Agana-Nsiire Agana, and I'm sharing this presentation on action and reflection in the digital age, a Kierkegaardian perspective on selfhood. And let me start by saying as well, apologies for the mispronunciation, because I'm sure I will get it wrong many, many times over the course of this presentation. So I'm going to offer a brief overview of digital culture in Ghana, after which I will speak a little bit about two concepts, action and reflection, as presented by Kierkegaard in his work, The Present Age. I'm using Kierkegaard's concepts to reflect on digital culture in Ghana and what it means for our philosophical and theological conceptions of personhood. So I will be looking at the social media publics that I have been interviewing in Ghana, according to three features of the information public as Kierkegaard sees it. And so I'll look at reflexivity in digital culture and end with a few questions for consideration. And indeed, let me say at the outset, the objective of this talk is to generate these sorts of questions. As you will see towards the end, that is totally contrary to what Kierkegaard suggests we should be doing, which is less reflection and more action. So for a brief snapshot of what is happening in Ghana in terms of digital culture, the country is starting to position itself as something of a tech hub on the African continent. And this is tied with the government's deliberate policy called Ghana Beyond Aid. Part of that initiative is to build a digital economy that enables the society to run without foreign aid, as has traditionally been the case. So digital is very important from that top-down government perspective. And so you have all sorts of technology hubs springing up. Google recently launched Africa's first artificial intelligence lab in Accra, and Twitter has located its African headquarters in Accra as well. An interesting statistic I've recently found, according to the Global Web Index, is that Ghana ranks 9th globally for time spent on social media. And so social media, especially for young people, is becoming paradigmatic. And my objective in this talk is to see how that reality affects the way they conceive themselves, and by extension, the way as theologians conceive of selfhood. So I've spent the last 4 months in Ghana doing interviews and focus groups with young people between the ages of 18 and 35 years old, talking to students, young professionals, and gender activists, online gender activists. I've also been speaking with some pastors and academics who are above 35 years old. So I've been focusing on Accra because my study focuses on the urban youth. And I have not been specifically tied to any given denomination. So this has been trying to look at public Christianity in Ghana in a very general sense. I've also looked at online content and taken all that into my philosophical and theological reflection. And so what does Kierkegaard tell us about the present age? Kierkegaard, of course, is writing about 19th century Denmark. He lived at an age in which technological changes were startling, to him at least, but to many people as well. And one of the effects that he warned about is the tendency of society to become much more concerned with thought and theory and what he called reflection than with action. So further down in his work, he develops these concepts of reflection and action in a very theological way. So reflection is indolence and passivity and the drifting away from divinity. Whereas action is the inward and deliberate response to grace that leads to faith in a Christian. And for Kierkegaard, of course, if you go by the stages of religious development alluded to in the previous talk, the journey of personhood is a Christian religious journey towards absolute relation with divinity. Unfortunately for him, modernity is marked by an age of advertisement and publicity. Even in his time, he started to complain about that already. I reflect that these are some of the same concerns that are often raised about social media today. And so I find that Kierkegaard possibly offers a good theological scaffold around which to build a reflection on contemporary developments. So one of the ways that you see how pertinent his thought was for our day is in his reflection on Tivoli Gardens when it launched in Copenhagen in the 19th century. Reflecting on those gardens, he said visitors could slip off their everyday identity and become tourists in some vaguely defined land to the east and south of Denmark. So of course, in our conversations today about digital culture, we speak a lot about multiple identities and opportunities that people have to drift across them. And we also speak about the effects of so-called virtuality as a sort of escape or as a sort of mirror or as a sort of parallel to the offline lives that we live and the effects that that could have. So Kierkegaard, to sum up, he describes society, or what he calls the public, as a creation of the media. It's not the same thing as the public in times past, which in which every individual had to think for themselves and decide whether they would join a cause or a movement. Today, everybody simply subscribes to this amorphous thing created by the media, which has 5 key characteristics. But for the purpose of this talk, I've chosen to share with you 3 of them, which are talkativeness, superficiality, and flirtation. So in talkativeness, he says that society has become far more enamored with endless talk, little action. Faith is becoming far more superficial than it used to be because people don't have to process for themselves the particulars of their belief. They can simply subscribe to a majority opinion. And flirtation, this tendency to present oneself in multiple ways without strong affiliation to any given one of them. And so are we finding any of these categories present in the digital culture of Ghanaian youth? In one of my interviews, my informant said this to me. He said the church is becoming too obsessed with online media. And he reflected that having a huge online following is not the same as having a flock of committed Christians. And this is a concern that Kierkegaard shared as well in his day. But I'd like to reflect on these things in more specific terms. So I spoke with one of the biggest Christian social media bloggers, a gentleman called Brabania, who runs Christian Vibes GH. And what he told me, as well as others in his space that I spoke to, is that building a Christian brand online does not involve necessarily sharing the specifics of the Christian faith. Does not involve sharing sermons and doctrine and biblical teaching. No, that's not what Christians are looking for online. Rather, they are looking for entertainment. They're looking for lifestyle content, and that's what he tries to serve. Not just him, but a whole industry of young people who call themselves Christian or gospel bloggers are serving content that effectively boils down to dance challenges. If there are sermon clips, they are from very, very funny pastors, like some of those I've put here on the left. One on the top left is Prophet One of the funniest pastors in Ghana. If you search him on YouTube, you will find titles to the vein of funniest moments from Prophet One, the nation's prophet. So this is the kind of content that people are looking for. The question is whether it is worrying for the development of Christian personhood or not. I also spoke with one of the largest YouTubers, the biggest YouTubers in Ghana in general, Kwejo Sheldon, who reflected that the tendency of the youth towards what he called the fast life, the glamorous life, was being promoted actually by a new crop of young pastors who had taken to social media to show what Christian life ought to look like. And it ought to look ostentatious, it ought to look flashy. The Christian is wealthy. So there are themes of course, there are themes of the prosperity gospel that get remediated online. The question is the nature of the projection of Christian personhood that is made and that is received by youth online. In trying to gauge this, one of the things I tried to look at was an instance in which the projection of identity from young people is expressly different from that which comes from the pulpit. And so I spoke to some activists, some online gender activists from a group called Them, who see social media as a place where traditional misconceptions about the identity of women were perpetuated. And so they took to Facebook particularly to raise activism against what they called toxic narratives from the pulpits. And so they pit themselves directly against many of Ghana's most notable preachers, and on almost a weekly basis would post on Facebook and on a radio program that they started, direct responses to sermons in which what they considered harmful gender narratives were being promoted. The question, however, with regard to that is that enough? Is that real action, or is that just more reflection? Is that just being talkative? That's the opinion of an academic that I spoke to, a feminist academic who reflects that social media activism amounts to no more than education. For her, she said you need to have boots on the ground. And so she was not too enamored with the approach that online feminists tend to take. With regard to flirtation and the drifting across of multiple identities online, in Ghana, there's recently been a scandal, if you will, around a gentleman who is being seen as a cyberbully, who takes to social media to, from time to time, cast aspersions against celebrities. Here he's face to face with one of the people he'd been casting aspersions against. And she says to him, well, you've been sitting on Twitter and tweeting all these things about me and, you know, this and that and the other. Here I am today, say it to me in my face. His response is telling. His response is, well, why should I say it to you to your face? She says, well, why not? You do it on Twitter. And he says, yes, but Twitter is not real life. And so I find in that conversation a vista of that propensity to assume a completely different persona online that is legitimate only within that space, and feel as if its legitimacy need not necessarily transcend into offline experience. Another aspect of flirtation Kierkegaard speaks about is a collapse between what he calls love and what he calls debauchery. Okay, love is healthy, but infatuation and being drunk with it is not. And so one of the things that people complain about a lot, even young people themselves, is social media addiction and its impact on academic performance, its impact on their own personal faith. And so I do find from my interactions with these young people that the concerns Kierkegaard raises around these three features of the media-saturated public are indeed present. So Kierkegaard says, though the individual seems to know selfishly what he is doing, one can only say of people en masse that they do not know what they do. Another telling statement for me when I studied social media in Ghana. And this is because on an individual level, people seemed to be fully aware of the things that they were doing online. They could not always necessarily explain to me why they did those things, why they posted the things they posted, why they followed the accounts that they followed. But at least they had a sense that they were doing this by themselves and they were taking responsibility for it. The troubling thing is that they were largely unaware of the way social media delivered content, i.e. algorithms. And even when I brought them up, they did not show too much concern about them. And yet, as we all know, these algorithms hide very, very, very powerful ideological interests from their makers and from the worldviews that these software companies come from. They tended to see technology in terms of magic, which is not inconsistent with the way technologies have been seen in African context for a long time. There's a fascinating paper called ICT as Juju, written by Francis Nyamjo, which I reference in the Fuller article, which I invite you to look at if you're interested. And finally, I also found worryingly a certain blind trust in the white man as the creator of technology, as superior to the black man, as in terms of the capability to deliver efficient working technology on which people can feel free to say what they want and do what they want, as opposed to, for example, in Ghana, what is perceived as an authoritarian political environment in which one might not necessarily have had similar freedoms. And so these reflections lead me to ask, well, is there truly a genuine reflexivity that leads to authentic, full development of the person? If reflexivity is essential in that process, then what I find is that perhaps we should think about it in terms of two facets. The first one I call by myself, which is basically, what am I doing by myself? And that aspect seems to be very strong and very clear in the minds of these young people. They have a clear sense of agency, a clear sense of autonomy. Whether that sense of autonomy is legitimate or not is a question that we can ask. They also had a clear sense of personal mission and ministry when they were posting Bible verses, doing evangelism, reaching out to friends with the gospel. But the aspect of what is happening to myself, or what am I doing to myself, in other words, what are the effects of these technologies on my being and on my change and my development, that was rather low or missing. And so I invite us on the basis of those considerations to think about these three questions. These are the three questions primarily that I will be reflecting on and trying to answer in the latter stages of my PhD work. The first one is, do social media give a strong sense of personal autonomy while hiding the influence of powerful hegemonic logics over the individual? Secondly, is the reflection needed to detect and consciously respond to these factors promoted or inhibited by social media? And if the above are true, what effect does this have on the Christian's ability to think and act morally online? Bearing in mind the passage that says that what is not done in faith is sin. Thank you.